Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is April 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank Richard Modiani, who introduced me to today's guest, William Mohr. Bill, where are you calling in from?
Actually, as you can see from my rather chaotic office on the campus of California State University, Long Beach. Normally, I'd be at home, but my computer doesn't have a browser that supports this podcast. So I came in to use my fancier computer at my job here as a professor at Cal State Long Beach. I get given a computer to use, which when I retire, they will, of course, take back. This is just a loan from but it serves its purpose today. It's good to be here with you on this program, Gerry. Last time we were talking, it was just a tape recorder, and this time the technology's been updated, hasn't it?
It is. We're on. Well, dig this, Bill. We're on live television telephone, which first showed in the New York World's Fair in 1939, the year Finnegan's Wake came out by James Joyce. But it became a reality in 68 and 2001 by Kubrick. The guy calls his daughter from the spaceship. Television, telephone, that's what we are. So the first question, Bill, is what's the best thing for a human being?
What's the best thing for a human being?
Yeah.
Well, to take a breath, I suppose, and to be conscious of taking that breath. I guess I give that response because over the past several years, I've been devoting a certain amount of time to meditation, and but I was always struck actually by there's a very early Sam Shepard play that ends with a monologue about breathing and enjoying the air. And I remember the first time I read that monologue, I was really struck by the quiet lyricism of Shepard's prose and the message that particular character had at the end of the play. I think the play was Chicago, though I'm not sure. It might have been Red Cross. It was one of the early one acts that he wrote. In any case, I think to take a breath and then to, as you exhale, allow the imagination to intertwine with that breath in some way. I've always subscribed to William Carlos Williams' dictum that only the imagination is real. And by that, of course, what he meant wasn't that fantasy was real, but that it takes imagination to see reality and as the relationship between things as they actually are in front of you.
So. Well, you're brilliant. You're concise and articulate, and I love you telling me all those things. Every event I have at Beyond Baroque, I say, could we all take in one deep breath consciously together? Yeah. So you've taught me a lot over the years. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh, for me, that's a poem. Which isn't to say that I'm always gratified by the poem, but I certainly feel that I was just reading Dickinson before we came, before this started, and one of her poems begins remorse is memory awake, and goes on to describe it as a compressed dispatch, and I think that's what a poem is. It's a compressed dispatch of what the imagination has engaged with. And for me, there's nothing that gives that kind of maximum effect with minimum effort. Now, the minimum effort, of course, is an illusion, right? As Yeats said, a line may seem a moment's thought, but of course, it's not a moment's thought. It's something that's been worked over, and then it seems to be spontaneously improvised and uttered, and arriving whole and intact. But so it's a compressed dispatch in that sense that it's an illusion. But nevertheless, that combination of brevity and duration, because what is said in a poem is meant to last. News that stays new, as Ezra Pound said. So that would be my favorite form of communication.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, now we're getting into some tricky territory here, because then it becomes a question of not, I mean, I think you said collect and retain information.
No. Well, the question is why do we collect or gather it?
Yeah. All right. So the collecting and gathering, I think, is only is I think fairly easily answered, in that we are a curious species.
Yeah.
Right. So there's just simply a curiosity, even within traditional societies that are very strictly observant of traditions, develop a habit of repeated inquiry into the meaning of the tradition. Sacred text such as the Quran, right, or the Jewish Old Testament, have centuries of commentary on them. So there's, in a sense, a curiosity about it. And therefore, even that which has, as I would say, that is tradition bound, causes us to want to generate questions, and in that sense, as you say, gather and collect information. The question of how willing we are to retain that information, I think, and apply it to ever evolving circumstances, is a really kind of different question. In terms of retaining information, I have found that students have completely lost interest in memorization, and many claim that they just simply can't remember something. I mean, they can't memorize a poem, whereas you and I may come from the last generation in which in school we were expected to memorize poetry. That was simply part of our education.
Yeah, I learned memorization because I was raised a Roman Catholic in Flint, Michigan, and I had a Latin quiz every day in high school, and I got straight A's because I knew how to memorize that stuff perfectly. And now I couldn't say one thing in Latin except Dominus vobiscum ecum spiritu tuo. You can eat my sleazy pancake just for saintly Alfonso. That's because Frank Zappa threw it in the middle of a song. but it's beautiful. You're dropping more quotes than me, man. This is like when I interviewed Fred Dewey, we were like he says it was like a ping pong game of quotes back and forth. So I'm going to go back because I want to tell you, Bill, wait a
minute. I want to insert here. Intruibo ad altare Dei. I was an altar boy and growing up in Imperial Beach, California. So in fact, we were probably helping out the priest at the different time zones. But I studied Latin for 4 years in high school, and supposedly I won a medal for it in my senior year. Though I remember thinking to myself, if they think I'm the best, I mean, how terrible are the other students? Because I really struggled with it, right? Although I'm fond of it. I'm fond of that training.
But you're dropping quotes. You have a collective memory skill that's amazing, and I love that because you do this thing. It's like Harold Bloom. Anybody can quote things, but Harold puts them into context and takes them farther. So you quote them and put them into a new, fresh context, stand on the shoulders of giants and take it further. And I want to remind you that I'm open for tangents, anecdotes, stories, and especially rewording the question or reinventing the question. It's not, you didn't just answer the question, you said, but the real question or a deeper question is this. So I'm open for that.
Sure, good. Yeah, because that is because in the end, that's what we're really talking about. What is memory? William Carlos Williams said, memory is a kind of renewal, and it is. There's this process in which you come at it again as if for the first time. So.
Yeah, it's a renewal, and that's what Finnegan's Wake's all about. Redemption. You fall down, then you get back up. You fall down and get back up. But the next question, Bill, you anticipated this, is this need or want? First of all, I want to tell you, most people, 80% of people say, why do we do this? Curiosity. The next question is this need or want to collect and gather information more innate or more invented?
Oh, I would lean towards innate. I think that although it certainly gets nurtured by the existential condition that our curiosity leads us to. That is, we end up finding out that we're a more curious species than at least a lot of other terrestrial creatures.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we completely underestimate the curiosity of those creatures that are within the larger bodies of water that make up most of the earth. And as usual with our egocentrism, human beings like to think that we're somehow special on the planet. But on terms of terrestrial creatures, we do seem to have a sort of higher. We realize that we have a larger capacity for curiosity, and recently I read that apparently the total number of human beings on the planet has been underestimated. And the article, of course, says, that at least at this point, we are probably very temporarily, the most successful terrestrial species around, and that there's more, at least in terms of quantity, there are more of us in terms of mammals than any other mammal around.
Right. Now, very good. Now, do thoughts create emotions?
Do thoughts create emotions? Well, it's an interesting that's an interesting question, in that this goes back to when I was in grade school in a way, and just the first time I sort of heard the word idea, it seemed a very peculiar notion to me. I had never thought about. I must have been like in the second grade, and I don't think the word idea as or a definition of the word idea had ever been proposed to me, and it seemed like a strange idea. And it was tied into the experience of learning to read for me. And then I distinctly remember standing in the playground at one point by myself and realizing that now I knew how to read, obviously on a very rudimentary level, but I was learning to read, and I literally felt the door closing. That it wasn't a door opening, it was a door closing, that a world was shut off from me. It would be permanently shut off. That literacy altered my way of perceiving the world.
Dude, that's so heavy. Bill, let me tell you, Mary Jane Schultz, one of my mentors, advised McLuhan, Ivan Illich, and Norman Mailer, and she invented the word splitteracy. And she spelled the S. She spelled the S with a dollar sign. She said, when we invented printed word, we fucked everything up. I mean, not fucked, but we changed things, and we shifted our left and right hemispheres. So it sounded like that. Did you become a reader?
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
That makes sense. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I'm not saying that I regret that,
Right. You don't regret it. Yeah.
but that was an experience of a shift in the paradigm, and and I went from there.
You
And
had an epiphany. You said,
well,
whoa,
yeah, I guess that would
wait,
be it
you
was.
wait a minute. I'm gonna become a literature professor, and this shit's
Well,
gonna
no,
preoccupy
the
me.
furthest, that was the I was the furthest thing from my mind. Let's get back to your question about emotion, because
Yeah, do
like
thoughts
the
do
idea.
thoughts create
I
emotion?
thoughts are emotional.
Yeah,
I I know that um I know there's a sense that 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 thought is rational and it's about the control of emotions, but for me, language itself is a very sort of physical, a physiological
yeah,
experience. It's not a mental construct. It's
yeah,
something that in a sense I feel like is very proprioceptive. It's very
yeah,
much it's an embodiment of consciousness. And so I don't really I don't really think that a truly profound thought can be unemotional.
yeah,
Whether even somebody like T.S. Eliot, for instance, who's known for his desire to erase the personality and to restrain the emotion, writes a line like "Time and the bell have buried the day."
yeah,
There's a thought that is loaded with emotion,
yeah,
and it's so haunting because in fact it is an idea. Remember, Pound said an image is an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. I
yeah,
repeat that endlessly to my students because they need to realize that the conjunction is and. It's not an intellectual or emotional complex. You know, it's not just if it's a complex of emotions, it's just sentimentality.
yeah.
So it's an image is an intellectual and emotional complex. So yeah, it is. Thoughts are emotional, and I think Pound knew that, and you know, so did Hilda Doolittle, and Virginia Woolf, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Fill in the blank, Bill. I don't know what I think until I.
Until I write it down.
Yeah. Well,
and
dig this.
then,
Dig
and
this.
then revise it, since I do not believe in first thought, best thought. You know, so like last night I was working on. Speaking of Ginsburg, last night I was working on an article that I have. It's going to be in a volume of essays on Allen Ginsberg's work. It's being edited by Eric Mortensen, who's a very important beat scholar, and the book is going to come out from Cambridge University Press, and I'm always pleased to be part of those Cambridge Companion projects. So I was wrapping up the end notes last night, and as I was going through the main body of the text, I went, "Oh, that sentence needs some work. That sentence needs some work." I mean, this essay is something I've been working on for about 10 months now, so
Yeah.
I'm a very slow worker, but I don't know what I think. Well, let's put it this way. I don't know what I want others to think about what I'm thinking of until after quite some time, which
Yeah.
means I have to have written it down and revised it.
Yeah, that's really good. You reworded the whole thing, but you basically said, I don't know what I think until I write it down and revise it. And
Yeah.
then you rephrase that beautifully. Because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Mm.
And so can humans think without language?
Well, you know, I think that comes back to that experience in the playground.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in a way, um, um, the that experience, I think that was part of that way, that was the door that was being closed, was that a kind of experience of thinking without language.
Yeah.
Right, that is probably done um, a lot by very young children as they move from babyhood to infancy, that there is a lot of thinking being done there without language, even as in fact they're acquiring language from the very first instant, right? I saw a great TV program years ago about that, and how within weeks and months the baby loses, the growing little, that tiny growing creature has already basically sort of shut down the switches that will allow it to learn various complicated languages, including ones that have a lot of sort of clicks and certain little odd sounds to them. All right, our brain obviously, sort of like the same way the brain has receptors for certain drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, which doesn't mean we should use them, but it has those receptors, and it obviously has a receptor for every potential human language. And but it doesn't need to know. It doesn't need to know 700 languages. So the brain, being an efficient, instrument, just simply goes to the fuse box, right? And just just flipping switches, and it theoretically could reflip the switches later on. But the older you get, as we know, it's tougher to move those kind of, get comfortable in their slots, and they don't really necessarily want to be disturbed, right?
Yeah, Bill, that's why Joyce put in over 65 languages in one book, Finnegan's Wake. But here's the thing. You were introduced to me by the great Richard Modiani. He taught me this line that resonates so deeply, and I think it evokes what you just said evokes it. Gary Snyder, the task of the poet is to see the world without language, then put that seeing into language. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to know, Bill, because you're second grade, you have this epiphany, or you have this, what did you call it? A realization. You felt the door closing because you can read. Did you become a reader because your parents told you to? 2, they did it as an example, or 3, on your own?
Well, I was in the classroom and I did what they told me to do. So they put a book in front of me and I started learning. The bad news, of course, was when I remember when I was in the second grade, and one of the people sitting next to me said, there's 12 grades. And I remember looking at my classmate going, 12? Yeah, there's 12. Yeah. We're in number 2. And that's what that moment of it was like learning that, your jail sentence, which, you thought maybe was going to be tolerable, was you weren't going to get a parole hearing for another 10 years, you weren't going up in front of the parole board for 10 years, you better, oh man, this is going to be. But wait a minute, but that question about right now, that notion of what you mentioned about Snyder and seeing the world without language, and then
putting it into language.
Putting it into language it reminds me of I think it was Snyder who, in an essay in the anthology Naked Poetry, said something to the effect of, if you had never seen a poem before, never, and what would you write that you would end up calling a poem?
Yeah.
Right. In other words, we so many poems. Well, at this point, almost it's would it be possible to write a poem that was not like some previous poem? And actually, the answer to that question is your favorite book. I think Finnegan's Wake, in fact, is the poem that has no previous poem to call upon. Obviously, there's interwoven with an extraordinary range of text, but as a poem, which it is, I think I think the
Yeah.
only way it's a prose poem, and it's maybe it's the ultimate prose poem.
No, that's nice of you to say that, because I've tried to get all the heavies from Beyond Baroque to come to my Finnegan's Wake reading club for 30 years. Richard can recite the first page. None of them have come. Maybe Ellen maybe came once, but most of them just poo-poo it. That's too far to drive. Now it's online. It doesn't matter. It's beautiful you said that, because it's not known to be a poem, and it is something different, but he's a Tristram Shandy wannabe. I mean, Joyce just saw that this could be done, and he reinvented it. He did it further, but you can trace down where he got it, Rabelais or whoever, Lewis Carroll, whatever. But that was really good, because the other one you said there, Bill, that really I love is Sun Ra said, everybody's in jail, but my jail's the best jail. so talk about a jazz shaman poet. Okay, here's Chomps.
I've never heard that quote before. That's great. I love that.
That's you could have turned to your second year graded student and go, we got 12 more years. Well, I hope it's as good as Sun Ra's jail.
Yeah, that's what I should have said. Yeah.
The adult went backstage at a Sun Ra concert, and he says to Sun Ra, my kid could play that, because it sounds like it's just banging on the piano. And Sun Ra went, yeah, but can he transcribe it?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Chomsky. Language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
When language breaks down for me, when it's insufficient to the task that I sort of see in front of me.
Yeah, like you're at the store and a clerk and you have a communication breakdown, language isn't working. What do you do?
Oh, like that classic film line, what we have here is a failure to communicate.
There you go. That's good.
What do I do? I must say that unfortunately, at those moments, I revert to a self that I do not like. That is, I become petulant, angry, upset, rude, abrasive, accused of raising my voice, etc., etc. I have very little patience with that kind of thing. So it's the side of myself that I am least proud of. So that's my reaction when
Bill, hear my mom's advice. She goes, my mom says, or she did when she was alive, God, give me patience and give it to me now.
Yeah.
Okay. Are your observations of humans in general? Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Oh, I think it's emotions. I think, or at least I think most people work, which is why they can be manipulated so easily.
Yeah.
All right. Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what I get. The answer I get the most is, I think we're more feeling beings. But Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. And you meditate. Don't people who meditate go, okay, now think about not thinking?
Oh, well, actually, that's what I like about the fellow on Headspace. He goes, look, the thoughts are going to come. That's what mind does.
Yeah.
Mind likes thoughts. It's going, and what you're training your mind to do is just to say, that's an interesting thought, and you let it go. And you go back to the breath. In other words, you don't try to fight, like thoughts don't come, thoughts don't come. Thoughts are going to come. You can't, you good luck trying to avoid them, right? If you're a flower, the butterflies are going to show up. You know, you go there and I'm going to inhale my pollen. Oh, pollen, pollen, pollen. Butterflies, go away. Butterflies, go away. Good luck. No, no, no. If you're a flower, the pollen will draw the butterflies, and you let them land on you, and they move away, and you continue with your journey of generating the pollen. You know, so
Good.
um, um, uh,
That's smart.
my response.
No, that's smart because there's a bumper sticker on a car on my street and says, "Don't believe everything you think." And I go, well, you could say, "Don't believe everything you feel." So here's the next one in the line of
Absolutely, don't believe everything you feel. Yeah.
yeah. And here's the next question. Or actually, these are two from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Who is this you're quoting or asking?
Alan Turing.
Oh, Alan Turing. Yes, of course, Alan Turing. I didn't catch the last name. My hearing, what it used to be. Yes. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, I'm. Did he ask this, or did he? Is this a question?
He asked these two questions. This is the first one. Yeah.
All right. Is thinking a function of the soul? Yeah, I'm wondering. My first response to that is I'm wondering if it came out of either a real conversation with Bertrand Russell or an imagined conversation with Bertrand Russell.
Yeah.
If it were, and maybe the question might be if it were a real conversation. I'm not sure that Turing would have been satisfied with the answer at all. If it were an imagined conversation, I can imagine. I think I can imagine Turing saying no. I think he would say that it was. I think the soul is something more profound than the mind.
Yeah.
And the mind is mainly what is thinking. The soul is something that's being nurtured by the body and the mind. And
well,
whether it has enduring, life is another matter.
Yeah.
That's not a whole separate issue, but I think in a sense, in a way, I guess I never thought the mind and body or a Venn constitute a Venn diagram, and there's a shaded part that you could say is the soul.
Yeah, that's good. I never heard that one. That's really good. The shaded.
Well, I think Gerry, one of the things that you like about your program is that the conversation starts and somebody says something that one of us, either you do or I do, or the person you're talking to says something that they hadn't thought of before. I'd say I hadn't thought of that before.
Bill, you nailed me. That's what I'm after. I'm after people not saying their stock lines. And I tried to interview Carolyn Casey, Coyote Network News, for 10 years. And most people, I just ask them once and then they say no. I go, so what? I go to the next person. But I really wanted to hear her. And I said, I've used your stock lines for 25 years listening to you on Pacifica. Don't you? And I told her this stupidly. Don't use your stock lines. She goes, drop your script. And she got me good, but I didn't drop my script. But she repeats her lines. I mean, some of these lines you've repeated in the past, but that's what I want to get is a little deeper, So the second Turing question, thank you, Bill, for saying that.
Because what is the second Turing question?
Yeah, because that's basically what I want to do is it's me and you psychoanalyzing the questions. That's what the real exercise is here. Yeah. So here's the second Turing. Can machines think?
Can machines think? Well, that's Turing, it would be, Turing, there's that isn't there that poem by Wordsworth, Milton, thou shalt be alive, thou shouldst be alive now. You know, Turing, thou shouldst be alive now. In fact, maybe there would be a nice poetry prompt for a or at least a writing prompt, because this is where we are. Can machines think? Well, I can tell you this, that there's no way that even if you put every computer to work on the face of the planet right now and told them that you have 10 months to generate an essay on Allen Ginsberg's posthumous collection of poems, Death and Fame, go to work. It would not have written anything half as good as what I wrote.
There you go. Beautiful.
Oh, can they think? Well, yeah, I suppose they can regurgitate and collect facts. Once again, you know, gathering and collecting information. But they, but the machine doesn't have, is, I don't think machine's capable of creating the Venn diagram we just talked about.
Yeah.
And therefore will always fall short of what we would think of as what in responding yes in the way that Turing means that question.
Yeah. Bill, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I pursue meaning. Meaning is happiness.
I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning tends to last.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, the original edition, was one of it was a book I read in the spring of 1967, and it was a game changer for me. It was I would rank it as one of the 10 most important books I read in my youth, along with All Quiet on the Western Front and that kind of thing. Yeah, Victor's he did a rewrite of it, which was more academic, it seemed, and wasn't as to me as efficacious.
Yeah.
In terms of having that. I don't think if I had read that when I was 20, when I was actually still 19 years old, I don't think it would have had quite the same impact as that original kind of stripped down version that came out in the paperback that I read. So yeah, and I suppose my response there is tremendously. It's interesting you bring up Frankel, because I would say that was certainly what launched me in quite accelerated the direction that I was moving in. I was already moving in a certain direction, but that was like getting this incredible booster rocket that just, you know, like one of these satellites, you know, it spins, they spin it around a planet, and then it really hurls it out into the outer reaches of towards the outer reaches of our solar system and then beyond. So that Frankel's book was like that, using the gravity of another planet to accelerate, right, the satellite that is on this journey.
Yeah, Bill, your words really help me get the picture and illustrate it. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so creating it or more so detecting it?
Yeah, I feel some ambivalence about that notion. I almost want to go, it's both and not either or.
Yeah, it is. It's both and.
I don't think that's it's almost like saying zeros and ones, right? You know, I mean, it's like the combination of these two environments. I almost want to say intertwined environments.
Yeah.
I think there is such a thing as consciousness that is separate from our consciousness, and at the same time, our consciousness impacts that consciousness. So there's this absolutely intertwined,
Yeah.
right, symbiotic relationship
It's like
between the
quantum entanglement or a Mobius strip. So
time entanglement. Yeah, sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, I think speed of thought. I've sort of conjectured for a long time that would be the way that we could really, if we could only, if we if somehow it were possible to um yeah, in other words, we perceive a star up there and we're thought is there somehow. The speed of thought in that sense, right, is in a way the speed of thought rides on the speed of the speed of thought rides on the speed of light, because well, I jotted a note the other day in my notebook. It was that language is an ocean and poets are surfers.
Yeah.
So it is, we are in the flow of light, and I think that's why poetry has this kind of is the moment when we're most sort of aware of that rapidity of and concentration. That's why it is such a compressed dispatch, because everything is flowing with this intense sense of acceleration. And that's when poetry is at its best, when it's not just sort of plodding along, but
Yeah.
it's actually sort of it's riding the wave. That's what I mean by that.
Riding the wave. That's McLuhan used that metaphor probably the first when he said surfing Heidegger and one of his books early on in the 60s. But I'm glad you said that, because when people say speed of thought, I usually respond like this, Bill. There's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right. So here we go into Audre Lorde saying you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer, her colleague, responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Oh, well, it's oddly enough, I sort of associate that the first quote with bell hooks, but I
Yeah.
guess it was Lord. I'm not really sure. I've certainly heard that. I've heard that. That saying for quite a few years. So your premise is that it's correct, that you can't you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, so that we need a new tool in order to do that dismantling. um what new tool would I suggest? hmm I don't really know that I don't really know that I have an answer for that.
Drop the word new. What tool do you suggest?
What tool do I suggest? Um,
Tangible or
I'd have
non-tangible?
to go back to saying a renewal of memorization.
Yes, there you go. Renewal of
I
memory.
think it's again, that's why the idea of new tool. I
Yeah.
think it's time to retool the. I think it's time to retool the imagination, and I
Yeah.
don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident. The problem is that everybody thinks that you can just pick this thing up and go, "Hey Siri," and you're
Yeah.
going to get this answer, and therefore there is no need to retain and information, which then can be collaged together, because that's what the brain is ultimately doing. Maybe, come back to your question about the speed of thought. Is which is faster, the speed
Yeah.
of thought or the speed of light? Now, I think I would suggest reframing that question to read, what's faster, the speed of collage or the speed of light?
Oh, the speed of collage or light. That is good.
Because in fact, you know I had a friend years ago, Sandy Tannhauser, who went to Boulder and to get a PhD in psychology. And one of the things she was studying was the comprehension of metaphors.
Yeah.
And she ran tests to see if which took longer for people to comprehend, metaphors or literal sentences. And much to her surprise, because one would think that the metaphors are more complicated, therefore it will take longer to sort of like process that.
Yeah.
Lashley processed the metaphors faster.
Yeah.
She never got around to actually formally publishing this. She finished her study, but she never formally published it. And somebody, she told me once that somebody did actually publish something with the same findings. And she did kind of wish that she had published hers because, of course, in science, the key thing is to duplicate. I mean, doing something once is all well and good, but what you really want is for somebody else to independently run the same kind of test. And hey, we got the same results, which that's what you want. But I found in the end, I mean, metaphor is a form of collage, and therefore the fact that people can process the metaphors faster would seem to suggest that the speed of collage is faster than the speed of light.
I love it. There's two things. Duchamp said there's no the artists of the future will only have to point. So that's what, metaphor is, a kind of a way of pointing with words. But I recently started this new question, and I'm just going to insert it really quick here. McLuhan said all words are metaphoric. Okay, we know that. They're all made up. They're metaphoric. Then what is the word literal a metaphor of? For?
Well, I was already leaning in the direction of some way incorporating the word silence. If all words are metaphor, what is silence a metaphor for? Would be the question that I would respond to that question with a question.
Yeah, that you win. That's what this series is all about, inventing new questions. Because Marshall has a great line where he says, he was asked, will there ever be silence? And he says, no. He just says, he doesn't say yes or no. He says, things exist in relation. So when Cage went to hear silence in that chamber, he couldn't hear it because he heard his blood pumping and his heart beating. But literally, me and you could get in a van or a car, drive for 45 minutes, get out of the car, walk for 15 minutes, sit in the desert and on a rock, and I swear me and you would hear silence. But that's because the relationship of hearing the car noise for 45 minutes, then hearing our feet on the sand for 15 minutes, that's the relationship. So you can hear silence. I hear it when I take my bike ride in the morning at 6 a.m. I swear I hear silence, but there's sounds, but it's the relationship. No, that's good. I love that. I really appreciate you helping me reword questions, because that's so important. Now, it's a perfect follow-up. You have ESP, Bill. I asked you what new tool you suggest. What new toy do you suggest? Or put it simpler, what toy do you gravitate towards?
What toy do I gravitate towards?
Because see, people, I would ask them what tool, that's the pen.
Toy.
I look at, put your pen up to the camera. There it is.
Well, actually, as a toy, I would have to go a paintbrush, because my spouse Linda Fry is a painter, and so over the past 7 or so years, I've accompanied her to a studio space and picked up a brush. And one of the things that I really love about painting is that, in fact, I I get to play and not use words.
Oh my God.
It's this conversation with it's a
Yeah.
conversation so with color
Yeah.
um and it's that which allows me to escape the, at least on a surface level, I would say
Yeah.
on a surface level, I escape the constant barrage of words.
Okay, that's perfect time for this. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. Even say non-tangible, say religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What does the two items you just brought up? What does the pen extend for you? What humanness? And then what does the paintbrush extend for you? What humanness? Because you talked about embodiment. It's something extending part of us.
I think
Doesn't
I
have to.
I think I'd go back to what I said earlier, right? About what I don't know what I think until I pick up, until I write it down, or until I start
Yeah.
painting on the canvas.
So you're saying it extends thinking?
Yeah, I think. But
Okay.
thinking once again is something that profoundly involves emotions
Yeah.
and not.
Yeah. So it extends feeling and thought. Okay. So what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
What do I worry about? Well, since this is being recorded and could be used by the CIA at a trial, extradite me to some prison.
But you did it right there by saying that.
What do I worry about? Um, of Well, on one level, I worry that and it's not so much a worry; it's just more like a conjecture of how much time I have left to get done all the things I want to get done.
Yeah.
But the other, maybe more pressing concern is the political situation in this
Yeah.
country and around the world right now.
Yeah.
It's not as I you know my I teach on a campus and when, mind you, I have not been a professor most of my life. As you know, I think we probably talked about this in a previous interview. I've held all kinds of jobs. I've worked as a blueprint machine operator. I worked as a typesetter at weekly newspapers for many years before I turned to academia. But some things haven't changed. When I was a student, you'd see the posters on schools, "Stop U.S. imperialism," and down the hall from where my office is, there it is on one of my colleagues' door, and I think to myself, yes, and stop the imperialism of almost every country I can think of, on any major country I can think of on the face of the earth. Stop Russian imperialism and stop the imperialism of those who support Vladimir Putin,
Yeah.
as Netanyahu does, for instance.
Yeah.
So stop the imperialism of the Saudi monarchy. Stop the imperialism of the Chinese, so-called Chinese communist government. I mean, this, free Tibet. Yeah, free Tibet. The rampant imperialism of all major political systems, whatever their inclinations, worries me a lot. And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm a single voice. Um, I guess I admire I like what Cory Booker did the other day,
Amazing.
in quoting John Lewis and saying, get in good trouble.
Yeah.
I was very pleased to see he did what he did. So
Totally inspiring. Beautiful.
wasn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I love what you just said. It's really important, Bill. Thanks for airing that. Okay. McLuhan learned from Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Bill, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Why do we ignore? Because the pleasure outweighs the because the pleasure seems great enough to compensate us for the reality of what we suspect is that the price is we're not looking forward to paying the bill at the end of the meal. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You know, but the food tastes so good that, you know, hey, waiter, bring me another glass, right? Why, this wine is great, you know, and then, you know, like, what do you mean I don't have enough credit on my card to pay for the meal? You know,
No, it's Emmett Grogan, you know, Ringolia. Everything should be free. It's true, Bill. Okay, so do artists have moral obligation?
you know, then we come back to, isn't that there was wasn't it John Gardner who wrote a book called On Moral Fiction? I'm trying to remember. I think it was John Gardner.
Yeah.
And this question, well, there's of course a related question to that.
Yeah.
And that is, and it goes back. I remember hearing it that it was first sort of really came to the fore around the time that Samuel Johnson's writing that first biography, first literary biography of Richard Savage, and that's the question: can a bad person create good art?
Yeah.
In other words, if you yourself are not good, then can you generate? And I think that's related to this. And this is a question that actually comes up, does it not? You and I were altar boys. So one of the questions that was raised early on in sort of advanced catechism classes was, you know, if you go to a priest and the priest is a debauched, lecherous, drunken, gambling addict,
Right.
and he hears your confession. Well, he's a bad person. Does your sins get forgiven? And the answer was yes. It doesn't. That it's not.
Yeah.
That the moral condition of the person giving the sacrament does not affect the efficacy of the sacrament.
Yeah.
So I think in the same way, perhaps, maybe this is simply another proof of the Jesuits saying that give me a child for 7 years and I have him forever, right? You know, that you can sort of be trained, right? You can't escape the gravitational pull of the Mother Church. That maybe the question that is, maybe I'm leaning or bending this question in that direction, that yeah, a bad person can create great art. And in a certain way, I think we do see that in I think some of the people that have created some of the most moving work are not people that I would hold up as role models. If I had to if I had children, I wouldn't go, oh yeah, you want to be like, right? You know,
that's like Lou Reed going on MTV. I was a junkie for 20 years. Don't do it. It's like, fuck you. You had a great life and you're telling us, but there's a better story, Bill. I love is a Russian government official is touring the art studios in Paris, and he walks into Picasso, who's finishing Guernica, and the German points at the painting and goes, "Did you do that?" And Picasso goes, "No, you did."
Oh yes, yeah. That's really true. You know, your job is to record. In fact, your job often is to record the moral discrepancies of the power structures.
Yeah. Okay. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Well, I'm not sure. Am I afraid of either? I don't
Yeah.
know. Why? I'm curious as to why the emotion fear is brought up in relationship to the ideas.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder where I got it. You know, a lot of my questions, you probably know her, came from Christine McKenna. That's what I started 40 years reading her questions and going, oh, I'm going to ask those. And I've asked her them twice. So that's a really good. I mean, a lot of people, when I say that, they go, I'm not afraid of ideas. But a lot of people do go, well, I'm afraid of old ideas because fascism and war sucks. And then they go, well, so it doesn't matter. Can you, this is something we touched on. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it depends on. Well, I mean, how far back does that? How far back is an earliest memory?
You put in the context you want. Anything.
Well, I suppose I would have been about 4 years. I guess the really intense early memories are probably don't really kick in till about four for me, which I guess for some people would be late, but I remember that. I I do remember, and I do remember when my mother lived a fairly long life. She died in here in Long Beach at age 97, and though she was only here in this area the last 2 years of her life. But I remember at one point I was visiting her, um, and she made this sort of side comment. She said, "You wore me out when you were young, telling me that I had to come outside and see what you had found." And of course, what that really meant was, I'd gone outside the house and seen something I had never seen before. I was filled with wonder at it, right? And for me, it was such an extraordinary thing to whatever it was that I saw, right? Maybe it was just like a flower, right? I mean, who knows? And and for me, it was the greatest magical act I could, that it
Right.
just absolutely was astonishing. And you gotta look, Mom, you gotta see that, you gotta see what I found. And of course I wouldn't let her alone until she had come outside. All right. And, and so okay, it was easier just to make me be quiet, right? To to go outside and see what I had found.
But
And
Bill, I think she was saying to you, I loved that you did that and you kept me alive for 90 years because of that. So
well, actually, I no, that's a nice spin to put on it, but I,
well,
I
it's the
I'm
flip.
not gonna
It,
go with that. I'm not going with that. That narrative
okay,
doesn't
but it's
out.
the flip of the question. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Once again, you got a knee and um um yeah, it's being framed as an either or,
Yeah,
and um the and it's not, it's both and.
yeah, it's both
I
and.
mean, I go right. I just quoted at the beginning, remorse is memory awake,
Yeah,
right? But happiness can be memory awake too, and
yeah,
happiness can be memory asleep.
yeah.
That memory, that your memory sleep is um is really part of the way that meaning of life constitutes itself. It's interesting that I mentioned earlier I did this. I just finished this article on Ginsberg's posthumous collection, and one of the very short poems in it is Richard III, which might seem and it's maybe 10, 12 lines long, and it's about reading Shakespeare's play Richard III at 3 a.m. in the morning, and and it because because it had been a while since I'd read Richard III, I took a look at it. And one of the things, and there's several dream poems, I want to say beneficent dream poems in Ginsberg's final book. In contrast, Richard III has a speech that goes on for dozens of lines by the character Clarence, who early on in the play, who recounts a prolonged dream that he had, a prolonged nightmare. And it is, of course, a nightmare that is staged because it is the nightmare of his life. The betrayals, the wars he fought in, the consequences of those wars, the actions which now he profoundly regrets, but which will, in fact, he feels send him to hell. And it's that, and therefore there's memory, remorse, memory awake, and in Clarence's case, memory awake in absolutely vivid, startling detail of a descent into hell. So memory, because then memory is that form of it's not a question of consciousness, but is that which shapes conscience.
Yeah,
that self that it's so that the shape shifting that occurs as our consciences weigh in on.
That's why Joyce wrote in Finnegan's Wake, "Remember to forget." So, Bill, tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
Someone in my immediate family. By immediate family, do you mean my birth family or my family?
However you want to define it. You put it in the context you want.
I think I'd have to really I think I'd have to really think about that one for some time. I come from a large family. I was the oldest of 6 children, and my spouse Linda is the second oldest of 7 children. So we both come from large families. In some ways, I think my brother Jim was the one who with whom who had a big impact on me, just in the sense that we were very different. He was more like my father, and I was more like my mother, at least in physical appearance, and maybe even in temperament. And yet, I know that I think somehow both of us have combined to live the life that I wish, each of us could have had individually. My brother Jim is younger than I am. He was the 3rd child, and he's smarter than me, and he would have been a brilliant professor, in my opinion. The only reason he didn't, he was married, he already had a kid, and by the time he got his master's degree, he didn't. He had to move on to get a job, get a career going to support his family, which is a shame, because I think he would have made I think he would have been a great political science professor. And I know his professors were actually very disappointed that he didn't go on beyond the masters, because he really stood out at San Diego State. There were veteran professors there. He tells the story that there was a veteran professor there who told him, the only reason I kept teaching was that I heard you were coming along the pipeline and I wanted to have you in a class.
Wow.
Yeah, he was like that. My brother Jim is very, very smart, and I in fact I could easily also see Jim as becoming a lawyer and perhaps a very successful politician, even although he doesn't pull punches on things. So politicians have to constantly watch themselves. So I think Jim has 3 children and several grandchildren, and has really raised an incredibly fine family. And I'm really proud of my um, of my the expanding family that he has, and of grandchildren, including grandchildren. And so
Well,
I
Bill, you answered that well. Now it's simply the same question outside your immediate family. Just briefly, someone who had an impact, and what was that impact?
well, I think the biggest impact on me was well, actually, I would say 2 people. Jim Crusoe, who's still alive, has been a model for me for over 50 years. And when I was younger, the poet Leland Hickman was an important mentor to me.
Yeah. Now you were raised Roman Catholic like me. Do you pray?
Do I pray? Um, Not formally. I I not in that formal ritualistic sense of prayer. When I write my poems, I'm praying.
Yeah. If
Dylan Thomas, has that great little quote before his collected poems about somebody he was invoking pagan times, and somebody was asked, and he recounts this conversation in this very tiny compressed dispatch, so to speak, in which he says that somebody said, "Well, why do you dance rings around these stones in honor of the Druids or whatever?" And he said, "Well, because I'd be a damn fool if I didn't." And Dylan Thomas said, "These poems are written for love of man and in praise of God, and I'd be a damn fool if they weren't."
yeah,
You know.
that's beautiful. Now,
And there's also that great quote, that haunting quote by the great Peruvian poet Cesar Vallejo, who who says, "Whatever cause I might have to defend before God after death, I have a defender, God."
wow.
And the that he has that kind of faith. Now Vallejo, like you and I were, was steeped in a deep Catholicism. I'm Peruvian, colonial Peruvian Catholicism. Well, maybe technically speaking, post-colonial, but the state of mind of Peru in 100 and 30, 40 years ago, 130, 140 years ago was still pretty much a colonial mentality, and so was
Yeah,
the Catholicism there. And so he was raised in that, and yet of course he moved away from that as a young man. But I think he was still very much shaped within that. and
yeah,
and when he wrote that, I think he meant it profoundly. I think he was a
yeah.
profoundly religious poet.
If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I don't have the I don't have the wherewithal right now at this moment to respond to that question.
Fine. Now, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil people evil isn't something that uses human doesn't exist as a separate entity. I think
Yeah,
evil is something that is a corruption in the codes that that causes people to deviate from from the imagination.
Back to that word, brilliant. So the real hidden question, Bill, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from The Mob and the Samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of prompts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, not really. You can acknowledge your enemy, but that doesn't mean that acknowledgement doesn't mean you hand them keys so they get free rent in your head, as they said. That would be my response. Yeah, all right. I'm not empowering you. I mean, I'm not reaching in my pocket and saying, hey, here, you can take over the apartment and become squatter. That's it. yeah, that's it. Maybe I would frame it that way, right? Not so much that not so much that enemies become get free rent, as you can allow them to become you allow them to become squatters, and then they gain legal rights.
Duh. That's like, I know somebody who's doing that right now. But here's Nassim Taleb saying games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So basically, the question is, does punishment work?
Yeah, there's punishment work. That when you started sort of stirring that particular pot and tossing in the spices, the first thing that came to my mind was kind of like, this sounds like one of those games, like the trolley problem.
The trolley problem. That is, I get that. It is like
about, which a UCLA professor actually came up with.
Was it really? Yeah.
And then there's that one, and then of course there's that classic one, and you and I could imagine ourselves in this, right? We're each in separate rooms, and the cops say, whichever one of you, we know you two did this job, and whichever one of you fesses up and gives us the details that we need, and was willing to serve as the witness, man, you're only gonna get 3 weeks in minimum security, but the other one's gonna get 25 years hard time. So your choice, right? But now we don't know. Now, of course, if neither the game works, right, and if neither of us says anything, we both get off.
Yes.
But the temptation for one of us, wait a minute, minimum security, yeah, it's got a swimming pool, a baseball field, ping pong, video games, the best food you can imagine. It's not minimum security. Actually, it's where we guards go for our vacations. So, it's just 3 weeks there, all expenses paid, and then you're free. The other dude, 25 years hard time. So, you think about it. Now, mind you, he could be in there signing it right now. So, you might want to sign this piece of paper right now. So you see, it's a classic game. It's that kind of, there it is. There's that kind of like zero-sum game that is dangled in front of us.
You're sounding like you're writing the script for Pickup on South Street or some film noir film.
Yeah, and Elmore Leonard. Elmore Leonard is one of the really, really terrific writers. I quote him all the time. He has to me the definitive statement on what a writer does. The job of a writer is to get the reader to read the next sentence.
Yeah.
And, and when I read that, I went, that really cuts to the chase there. That's what your job is. It makes no difference what the story is. The job of the writer is to get the reader to the next sentence and to make them want to read the next sentence.
Yeah.
And whether it's Finnegan's Wake or Pick Up on South Street,
there's no difference. It's the same thing. That is really beautiful, because I do have a great quote here somewhere from Sam Johnson that I love to throw out sometimes. And he says, nobody but a blockhead. Let me get it. I think nobody but a
blockhead, but nobody but a blockhead writes for money. That's, I think, the phrase. That's the one you're looking for.
That is it. See, you're beyond the beyond, Bill. I can start the quote and you go, let me finish that for you, dude. That was really good.
Because when I read that, I loved it. It was such a great statement.
Yeah.
I thought,
but someone sussed it out to me. They said,
unfortunately, I said to myself, man, that explains it all. I'm a blockhead, right? I write poetry,
That's like, I told this great poet, I said, T.S. Eliot said a mature poet steals, the immature poet imitates. She goes, well, I must be an immature poet then.
Yeah.
But here's James Joyce, first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago, basically checks out. This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner says sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, because the imaginary characters can say things that would never quite occur to us. Speaking of trees, there's that great Faulkner story, Spotted Horses. And the local yokels are sitting around in front of Flim Snope's store, right, whittling away at their wood, and they're talking about the local land conditions and how hard it is to keep land cleared. And one of them says, "Willow ain't a tree, willow's a weed." I remember reading that and I just burst out laughing. And you can just hear that person saying that, and I never thought of that. I mean, that sense of looking at the landscape. And so, of course, yes, you could say, well, I could just go outside and I can look at a field and I could see some willows, but it would take that character saying that on the porch of Flim Slope's store is what I remember, and what allows me to sort of recontextualize the human's relationship to, if you will, nature, and trying to extract our sustenance from it.
Bill, brilliant, because that's about 3 blocks from Beyond Baroque in a back alley I saw painted on a fence. Weeds are just flowers once you get to know them. A. Milne.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard that. Yeah, I haven't heard that quote in a long time though.
Yeah.
It's nice. Yes. Yeah.
So I asked for 90 minutes. We got about 7 more minutes. I hope you'll agree to a part 2 some 6 or 8 months down the road so we can really get into poetry. But let's try a couple more. When you're writing a poem, what role does intention play in your creative process? And I'll set it up. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're writing a Bill poem, or, well, let's say poem, because you're writing an essay right now. We could go into essay too. But when you're writing a Bill poem, what role does intention play?
Oh well, I lean with Kubrick, who ultimately, of course, is who ultimately is formulating that notion out of Keats's negative capability.
Yeah.
Right. Why Keats said in his famous letter, that he was talking with his friend about Shakespeare and why Shakespeare was so great. And sort of like we're having a conversation, except that like let's be honest here. How many people are at Keats's level, but we'll separate that out for the moment and just simply say it's interesting that it was a conversation that
Yeah.
this notion comes out of, and that in fact I would say that all I think a lot of superb ideas really are basically dialogic, and therefore the notion of the individual having come up with the idea is a little bit specious. I think that just like I would say that a lot of it is dialogic.
Yeah.
So Keats is talking with his friend, and he says, "Well, Shakespeare is great because he had more negative capability than anybody else. That is, the ability to stay in a state of doubt and uncertainty without the irritable reaching after fact." And
Yeah.
that was sort of an E equals MC squared moment there, where he opens up the subjunctive and says that what is really cruel, what is really crucial, it could be cruel too, because to endure it is not that easy. But what is really crucial is to be able to not rush to intention too soon.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean that you don't arrive at something that is intentional, but that it's not necessarily in the forefront. And to that extent, it comes back to that saying that the only book worth reading once is that which is worth reading twice, because
Yeah.
it's the second time through that you often find those little hidden things that maybe were not necessarily intentionally placed there by the writer, but simply arrived as sort of a gift of the imagination. All right,
Yeah.
something assembles itself in some unexpected in some unexpected way, rather unanticipated way.
Yeah.
Right, something, and therefore the meaning thickens, right, and gains even more taste, right. It as it matures. So
I mean,
it's the second reading through and the third reading through, which in fact then leads itself to memorization. You begin to absorb it, and it becomes part of your consciousness.
Bill, it reminds me of the guy goes to his guru and says, "What's the best question I can ask you?" And he goes, "The one you just asked me." So Duchamp said, "There's no art without an audience." How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
Well, I'm that question of a reader. As I've gotten old, I'll simply say that as I've gotten older, um, I I've realized more and more that I have, with intention, I've been aware that one wants to try to write for some future reader who has not yet been born. And that doesn't mean that, I don't mean that in the sense that, oh, well, that will mean my work was canonical or had durability. What I mean by that is that I hope someday that somebody reads something of mine and experiences it as a gift, that in the same way that when I've read poems by Emily Dickinson or Hart Crane, that I experienced those poems as gifts.
Yeah.
They had no idea that I would ever be alive. They weren't writing them for me. And there I found their poems, and they have meant so much to me.
Yeah.
And they feel like an absolutely undeserved gift. I mean, but it's a gift, and I'll accept it, and not only accept it, but celebrate it. And because having been given that gift, having been given those gifts, one wants to pass on a similar level of energy to others. One would like to keep the gift. In other words, it's a gift exchange. And in fact,
Yeah.
there is that notion of, like when we were talking about culture earlier, right?
Yeah.
That what would I maybe, in fact, maybe that would be the response to one question that had to do about changing things. That maybe what is needed is to bring back the notion of a gift exchange
Yeah.
as the basis for cultural practice.
It's beautiful.
That knowledge is that imagination involves a gift exchange,
Yeah.
and so that's what I would like to when I think of my quote audience or a reader, I think of it as a gift exchange.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Now, gift exchange.
Amazing. You're a real wordsmith. You're a true blue wordsmith. You're concise and articulate, Bill. I'm so grateful for your time with me today. And I was wondering if I can ask you one more, and maybe we can plan a part 2, 4 or 6 months down the road, so we can really get into poetry and in prose and the difference between art and science. But you can decide do you have time to do one more, or you got to go now?
No, I can do one more question. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you so much. This is Louis Bersani's study of Mallarmé. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. Now, there's some radical words there that are pushing a little far, maybe, than what he's essentially saying. But any thoughts on that line? The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, Bersani is among other things, Bersani asked questions about, can art redeem experience? And at least I remember, it seems to me, reading something to that effect in a footnote in a book I read 20 years ago. And his answer was no, that art, in fact, if art would claim to aspire to redeem experience, it demeans that experience. In other words, specifically, I think Bersani was addressing that notion of what is referred to as the Holocaust, that an art can't redeem that experience. And art cannot redeem fallen experience. It's the fallen experience remains what it is. And so I think that's what he means by that. I think that's at least one of the things that he's referring to by this crisis that that's affecting the composition of art. And yet, what other response can we bring to it other than somehow engaging in what another psychologist refers to as that the function of art is wish fulfillment. And I wish I could remember his name right now, but I can't. I think it might be Holland, but I'm not sure. In any case, that the basic Frederick Jameson quotes this fellow in a slightly different context in a book, but the point that is extracted from this reference to the psychologist remains, I think, quite pertinent. Art is wish fulfillment, said this psychologist. And I think that's really true. I mean, when you write the poem, when Refke writes his poem, the whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. And so he writes it. He is the first line of My Papa's Waltz. This is a poem in which Refke is trying to reconcile his memories of being a child with his very hardworking and more than slightly inebriated father, probably on a Saturday night, and they're rather, tight and their rather small house as his father's trying to raise, keep the family going. And so it's a very short and extraordinary lyric about this memory that he has of his father, and it's that Refke finishes the poem, and as the psychologist would propose, for a moment, the tension is resolved. The wish fulfillment, there is a fulfillment of the wish of some kind of reconciliation. But of course, that is only a temporary equilibrium.
Yeah.
And for the artist, eventually the crisis emerges again and must be dealt with again in another attempt to calm the waters through wish fulfillment. So
could be a healing. You mean it,
redemption, but I do think there's wish fulfillment.
yeah, but could it be healing? Could it be an exercise in healing his wounds from an alcoholic death?
Yeah.
But could I just ask you, how do you spell Ruski? R-U what?
Rethke is Roethke. Roethke. Theodore Rethke.
Okay, Theodore. Okay. I just want to make sure I have that spelling right, because before I tell you the source on this, it reminds me of this saying: art is making your problems other people's problems. What do you think of that?
Well, there's that notion that there's always that question of the individual and the universal, and one of the trickiest things for a very young writer to learn, and young writers are notoriously sort of self-obsessed, but only on a superficial level. And the problem is that they sort of split. They want to be universal, so they write in this sort of grand general manner, right? And what they don't realize is that they have to go into a very intense personal level, and that through that the universal emerges. To that extent, if you mean by that making your problems other people's problems, there's truth there. The tricky part of that, though, Gerry, is, if you will, the sort of white European privileging that goes on. As one critic put it, why is it that when John Updike writes about a New England town, it's universal, whereas when I write about a village in Nigeria, it's just local and provincial?
Yes. Wow. You are so smart, that because you have what I call it ESP, but you have a deeper sense, because the guy I got the quote from, and it kind of sounds like Woody Allen, right? Art is making your problems other people's problems. Yeah, I'm going to be neurotic for 50 films and you're all going to laugh. Ha ha ha. And he's a great filmmaker, a great writer. I like him, but the quote is from Mike Kelly, who they named the art gallery at Beyond Baroque from, who I asked over two interviews 10 years apart all these stupid questions, and he was an amazing guy. But when I talked about this, but to me, he was too smart to commit suicide. And my friend who teaches autism at Yale the other day, Mary, you might know her, Mary Anna Pomonis, talked to me deeply about that and says, no, you got to get over that. When someone commits suicide. But it is like, art is making your problems other people's problems. Well, you could say art is making your joy other people's joy.
Yeah, or maybe art more often comes out of the fact that other people's problems become your problem. I could go through life and feel like I don't have any problems. The problems I have are largely caused by other people's problems. In a way, once again, going back to people who are, you really don't want your children to see them as role models. But I admire Keith Richards as an artist very much, and I think there was something he said that was quite witty at one point. He said, I didn't have a drug problem. I had a police problem.
Oh, wait, I said Lou Reed, but you said Keith Richards. Dude, yeah, I like Keith Richards. I don't like Lou Reed, but yeah, I have a police problem. That's Keith Richards. I love
that. There's some truth to that. Now, of course, I agree with Keith. I think his music at various times was affected by his drug use. On the other hand, he's really one of the most interesting. I would even go this far. I think he's a composer on a certain level. I mean, I think his music is the music that he's generated is really compelling and memorable. And but I thought there was, I did appreciate the fact that, yeah, I had a police problem. In other words, I wasn't having a problem with it. It was other people's problems with the fact that they regarded what I was doing as a problem.
He wasn't harming other people mostly, except maybe when Robert Frank captured how assholey and the Stones were being druggies. But how about this one, Lenny Bruce?
Yeah.
You can call cops 3 things: cops, cops, pigs, or peace officers. So I take that farther. Well, why don't we just call them peace officers? Because that's what we want them to do. And that is William Blake. We become what we behold. So when you label, if you label them peace officers, they'll get the idea to be peace officers.
No. That's what you're imagining is that language can always be a performative act.
Well, isn't that Wittgenstein?
Right? So
Yeah, but isn't that Wittgenstein? Well, I hope so, because if anything, I want Lenny Bruce to be the performative artist who's president. But I mean, isn't that what Wittgenstein said? Our language shapes blah blah blah.
Yeah. I think it would be fun, but I just don't imagine being at a protest now of at a protest at which police are called and saying, "Hey, you're a peace officer." We come in peace. They probably try to break my fingers. So, Ashley, this is a good time to stop. My spouse.
Okay. But I gotta tell you, Bill, one last thing. Vermin, a political activist, says at a protest, you chant in front of the cops, "Give the cops a raise. Give the cops a raise." Okay, Bill, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and energy. I learned so much, and you're really generous. Even though I'm going to hit this end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Well, let's keep onward, as my mentor and friend Donald Wesseling was fond of saying. Onward.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.